The time has come for my people to go.
I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's what the people demand. We gonna keep fighting till we get that land. I'm not a queen, I'm a servant of the people. I'm not a king, I'm a servant of the people. It's time to rise to get what we want. We got to organize.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Pantsula Podcast, brought to you by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. For those of us who are not familiar with the A-APRP, we were founded by Kwame and Nkrumah in 1968, and our objective is Pan-Africanism. And we define Pan-Africanism as that of a goal of having a totally liberated and unified Africa under scientific socialism. Today, I have with me my fellow comrade Sadiq, and we dedicate this episode to two ancestors.
Yeah. So with that said, two of the ancestors we're dedicating this episode to is one being Cedric J. Robinson. Cedric J. Robinson was a member of the Revolutionary Action Movement back in the 60s, I believe. He's also an author, not only an activist, but also author, revolutionary. The author of one of the more famous books a lot of people know called Black Marxism. The Making of the Black Radical Tradition is a great book. For some people, it may be an introductory text. For me, to be honest, it wasn't really introductory. It's kind of complex, at least for me when I first digged into it. But it's a great book. And then also the book that Joshua Myers did recently on his life is also, something that I'm gonna start digging into actually, which I've been hearing great things about. But yeah, so Cedric J. Robinson, he made great contributions to the struggle, not only with his organizing work, but also with his academic or intellectual studies, I should say. And then the other person who we're dedicating this episode to is Rosa Parks. And a lot of people, know about Rosa Parks, but as you guys know, she was a part of the Montgomery bus boycotts. She organized with the NAACP and also Martin Luther King and SCLC in various ways. As you guys know, she was known for refusing to give up her seat back when buses were segregated. So, as we know, she was also someone who fought for African people to help get liberated. So definitely like to pay respects to Rosa Parks. So this episode is centered around the reactionary forces as it relates to the African diaspora. So we're gonna go ahead and dive into that. Essentially, I guess the first question I will pose, or I think we should probably get into, is the motives behind these reactionary forces and essentially who they are. So I guess I'll put that out there so we could discuss.
Yeah. So really, the people and organizations backing these reactionary forces are typically like entire countries, often countries in the global north, but it can really be countries like anywhere in the world. So the countries that support these reactionary forces often are like basically just trying to gain and accumulate as much wealth as possible. And so that's usually by like trying to maintain the relationship that they have with countries that they're basically exploiting. To go into more detail, at least for the African diaspora, so this would include like Africa and then also places where like Africans have moved to, whether it's like Latin America, like Europe, or the US. So like in this like relationship, African countries and communities provide cheap labor and cheap natural resources for global northern countries or companies. And so from those like labor and resources, the global northern countries and companies process those resources and create new products, which they sell at a high profit margin back to both their own country and then back to the African marketplaces. So this way, the northern countries can accumulate as much wealth as they want to. So like one example would be for like oil. So they would gain cheap oil from a African country, um, get all the oil like as unprocessed as possible, and so from that oil they can make like a bunch of things. So they can make fuel, they can make gas, they can make petroleum, they can make Vaseline, like so many different things that they can make out of it. uh and like compared to how much money they're like selling these processed items for, it's like amazing in comparison to how much they're actually getting the crude oil for. Uh, so it's basically just a way to make money. Um, and so when there's countries, and so the goal of these reactionary forces is to maintain this like relationship of like African diaspora providing cheap resources and labor, so that these countries and companies can make money. So when like African countries want to increase the prices of labor or resources, or when countries want to process their own resources how they see fit, or when the countries just no longer want to interact with the global northern countries in the same way as they traditionally have, these reactionary forces are going to come into play.
Yeah, exactly. I think you made some great points there. Essentially, these reaction forces tend to be the imperialist nations of the world, the capitalist nations of the world, the nations who lead in those arenas of being imperialist and capitalist. They have intelligence agencies that are linked with them to ensure that their interests are fulfilled. We have the CIA, FBI, which is more so coming out of the US, and then you have the MI6, comes out of Britain, the PIDE, historically known as that. I believe they changed their name to SIRP, Information Systems of the Portuguese Republic. French has their own intelligence agency, so forth and so on. All right. And their whole purpose is to kind of what you were alluding to earlier, Winfred, just to, piggyback up for some of the stuff you were saying is, or echo some of the same sentiments, is that to ensure that they could maintain exploitation of the global South, in particular to this conversation, the African continent and the diaspora, because as you know, Africa itself is probably the most mineral rich continents out there. So, where you talk about from our laptops, our phones, with coltan, you talk about, like you said, oil, you talk about bauxite, you talk about copper, magnesium, whatever you could think of. And all these things, they may just sound like, oh, okay, just like random resources, but we don't a lot of times think to how these things power our everyday technologies, our cars, our lights, even the light bulbs we have, usually come through, some mineral resources out of Africa or the global South. So even you're talking about the Central or South America, even some of the crops and stuff like that we have, like bananas or whatever the case is, some of the produce that we have comes out of there. So they want to maintain and ensure that they can get these things at a very low price, and remain at dominance and hegemony. So that's why they have this intelligence agencies to do so, because under a capitalist society, you can't you got to make sure labor is at a very low cost because you want to maximize profit. You got to make sure the things you're getting is suppressed at a low cost so it could benefit you. So now in the case where a country is looking to become socialist, where they want to have a more egalitarian type of society, that won't help. It contradicts the capitalist interest essentially. So you can't have that. So that's why they suppress a lot of those efforts that Africans have made throughout the diaspora to fight for socialism, whether it be domestically, whether it be on the continent, whether it be throughout the diaspora in general. We see that a lot essentially. So just to kind of give you guys a framework of what these intelligence agencies are. I think maybe we should also probably be getting into some of their tactics as well. And I believe for me, I think you see, there's a few books I've been reading. Get this out here. I'm not been posting this on my social media a lot. Dirty Work, the CIA in Africa. It's a really good book. I'm still like early into it. And then you have the FBI War. This book is amazing. I'm pretty much like done with it. I'm like just got a few pages left. It would take me forever to read this. FBI War on Tupac Shakur and Black Leaders by John Patash. This book's amazing. And more so speak to like the domestic interests of the FBI and the CIA. And then this book, well, I just started probably like 2 months ago or so, a month and a half. White Malice. This book is really good too, by Dr. Susan Williams. This book is also really good too. But yeah, so some of the tactics, and then also a book I forgot to get out, the what is it? The War Against the Panthers by Huey P. Newton. Where you see the tactics are a lot of times centered on creating dissension, because they understand that unity, when people are unified, obviously they could have the ideology, they could be organized against these forces, versus if we're just sporadic, we're all over the place, no unified goal, objective, ideology, nothing. They could inflict anything they want to, because these reactionary forces that we've named, we were talking about, they're organized, right? That's the way they're able to maintain their power and through organization. That's like those intelligence agencies, like the World Bank and IMF, like these NGOs, non-governmental organizations, so forth and so on, right? These are entities that are maintaining the oppression and exploitation of the global South, essentially. So with that, those tactics, we see, propaganda, right? They have, you could say propaganda is used on both ways, but they have intensive propaganda where they put out, you call like psychological warfare. They have chemical warfare that they've utilized. You think of like Paul Robeson said that the intelligence agencies had a hand in, drugging him, essentially, right? Psychologically, like, you go on social media and stuff like that, they try to create this whole narrative around, you look at Cuba, SOS Cuba, right? And try to paint everything negative as like this socialist governments, whether it's Cuba, whether it's it's funny because speaking of propaganda, there's literally something that just came out like, oh yeah, North Korea, they just banned laughing, like like,
leather coats.
Yeah, leather coats. Everyone wants to be like Kim Jong-un and wear leather coats. You're not allowed to. Like, it's crazy, man. And they foster a lot of the confusion, ideological confusion in the West, essentially, for that. So, and then even I remember reading The War Against the Panthers, they done stuff like not only, I'm sorry.
One example is the coloring books.
Oh yeah. I think Patash talked about that. They created coloring books for kids, centered on like, oh, kill the pig and stuff like that, to try to make it seem as though the Panthers had created that when that wasn't the case. And then also the IRS actually got in on some of their little dirty tricks and stuff like that, trying to get them on like tax evasion and things of that nature, even though they're a political organization. And I believe at that time they were required to pay tax. So I know Huey Newton was talking about that. Not only in creating East Coast or manufacturing East Coast and West Coast, beefs and stuff like that, by docking up fake letters and, passing them off and stuff like that. So there's so many different, tactics they use just to either foster, dissension or create confusion within organizations to spread them apart. Actually literally killing members through, brutal force by murder, and then putting it on someone else or something like that. Or even also, like I stated earlier, some type of chemical warfare, drugging someone or putting something in someone's drink or something like that, right? And then, killing them or whatever the case is. So they've had their hand in various other ways to do so. So yeah, I don't know if, you had something you wanted to discuss too as well.
Oh yeah, so like for like a good number of these tactics, at least for organizations, a lot of them were created around the World War II era. So the precursor to the CIA, it was called the OSS. And so they had like created a bunch of documentation, a bunch of like resources for like potential spies to basically like help create dissent within organizations. At the time, it was created to create dissent within World War II Germany and like other powers that are allied to Germany. But as the OSS became the CIA, uh, and like they shared information with the FBI, with like so many different organizations that were doing that had similar interests, it began being applied to African diaspora as well. So like we can probably link the document later on. It has like a good number of pages describing like different ways that they actually like try to cause dissent. Um, I guess like a couple of examples that we can talk about is like they had a couple of like items or ways to basically create dissent and prevent like growth within the organization. So like one could be never pass like this is a quote. So never pass on your skill and experience to others. Uh, so basically like limit the amount of information that's actually shared within the organization. Uh, bring up like irrelevant issues as frequently as possible, or like try to cause like internal fights or conflicts. Haggle over precise wordings for communications, minutes, resolutions. Uh, contrive as many interruptions to your work as you can, um, and then like advocate for caution or like being reasonable, and like basically trying to delay progress as much as possible, uh, in like any means or format as they can. uh, they also did like actual like tangible ways, as like Sadiq already mentioned, as in like like actually like killing people, silencing people and things like that. Um, and then even beyond just for spies within organizations, there were like national uh, reactionary movements against uh, like the African diaspora, in which they would push public sentiment for war. Like that's kind of why they're doing a lot of the like lapping is illegal, or like leather jackets are illegal in this other country. It's basically a way is like not necessarily true. Um, and like it can, even if it's disproven later on, the goal of it is to associate these like limits of freedom or uh inequality, or like unfairness with like a certain government or with a certain economic system. That way, like even if you're not consciously thinking about it, in the back of your mind you'll be like, they probably need like a change of government.
Yeah.
uh, and so with like and so like you'll end up thinking, and so in the case where uh the US or another global northern country like starts a fight or starts a battle, uh you'll probably lean on your own, on the side of your own country, as opposed to a country that you view as like limiting freedoms or like limiting democracy, uh even when that's not necessarily true.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like, in the Imperial Core, I guess it ties in with the propaganda. They want us to create what they call like manufactured consent for them to go to war. What you think about like the weapons of mass destruction back in the early 2000s and the Bush administration, trying to say that countries in the Middle East were holding weapons of mass destruction, which they found multiple times to not be the case. Even in that period, it wasn't like it came out years later in that time period, but they kept pushing for things of that nature. The same way, like we talked about earlier with North Korea. Same thing they're doing now with China, right? Oh, with genocide, right? And especially in this country where not only is it the propaganda hit us through social media and the TVs, these institutions we grow up in, like educational institutions like K through 12, and even academia spaces also fosters that, right? They push a lot of that propaganda through various texts that they make us read and things of that nature. They leave critical information out. It's not a dialectical approach to history or any type of historical materialism, implemented in that. So when people see this propaganda, that's the whole purpose of it. Because then when people see this propaganda, because we've been hit with a lot of disinformation about socialism or what it really is, or communism or what it really is, and even capitalism, A lot of people you talk to on the street today can't define all three. You know, they just associate, well, I seen a YouTube video, I seen a YouTube clip, I read a headline that told me communism is bad, or because they said they banned whatever jackets or something like that, and it's in North Korea, no, it has to be terrible. So that's how you manufacture consent. So the US decided they was gonna spread peace or democracy, whatever, right? You know, to a country, which is really a code word for you know, imperialist, some type of imperialist war or something like that, or expansion. You know, then people are like okay with it in that sense. We've seen that what happened in the Middle East in the early 2000s and in the 90s and stuff like that. So that goes into that. So I think also too that another institution that I left out that should be talked about heavily is AFRICOM, right? That's a big institution that is used to maintain imperialist interests, to maintain you know, further exploitation of Africa in the content, and also in a sense that, you know, it's part of some of the tactics that they use is you know, those military forces usually in some case, you know, train the local police forces on how to, you know, better suppress the people and stuff like that whenever they rise up in the face of oppression, essentially, you know, you jail them, beat them, stuff like that. And it's just not just them, you know, you even have ties with some of the Zionist organizations as well that do so, like the IDF. So so yeah, man, I think you know, these tactics are very brutal in some cases. You know, they're not only physical, but it's psychological as well. They happen in various other ways. So I think we always got to be cognizant of that. So I think it's best that we definitely refer you, especially from the psychological aspect, to watch our episode on dialectical and historical materialism. You know, so you guys can kind of understand on how to create a form and analysis on anything and not just fall for the propaganda, because, you know, none of the school systems we went through for the most part, I don't care if you went to HBCU, it's the same thing. I'm sorry. I just hate to say it, but it's the truth. You know, they don't teach you that either. So you have to, you know, unfortunately join an organization or by luck come across information that would that leads you to, you know, scientific analysis on anything. And that's usually through dialectical historical materialism, or implement that in your research. So so yeah, you know, they you know,
I think one good example of that is like, I think in a lot of cases, if you ask somebody to define capitalism, they'll say when you buy and sell things.
yeah, people conflate commerce and then trading, like that hasn't existed in antiquity, you know, in ancient times, right? Like that's something that's been going on for centuries before capitalism came to fruition. And because capitalism is the current system, they're like, oh, it has to be the greatest. Like, you know, there was communalism, there was feudalism, you know, now we in capitalism. And even with capitalism, there's successive stages of capitalism. Like you have primitive accumulation, you know, you had the era of like free trade and competition. And now we're in the rise of like, oh, we're not the rise, but we're in like late stage capitalism, which is monopoly capitalism. So, you know, people can't describe these things, or like the political economy of like of imperialism, things like that nature. Get that book too as well, by Danny Navigere, one of the great scholars. I think it's called, yeah, The Political Economy of Imperialism. But
yeah, and that's because like the people that are supposed to teach you these things don't. And that's because they have vested interest in you not knowing.
Exactly. Yeah. These you know, these institutions that are, you know, funded by the state. So obviously the state is in cahoots with with the capitalists and imperialists and everything like that. So they're not gonna teach you to fight against the system that's oppressing you. Like that is it, you know. Was it that Audre Lorde quote? What is it? That the master won't give you the tools or something like that to dismantle itself. Something of that nature. My bad. I'm like, I just probably like messed up that whole quote, but but yeah.
Don't come for us.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's funny too, because you even think about their propaganda where they say like freedom of speech, right? And it's funny because your account will get taken down on social media if you say anything anti-state, right? For the most part. Not all the time, but in some cases, if you have a big of enough platform. I remember a comrade of mine, he posted a picture of the Haitian Revolution his his account got suspended just for doing that, and so in various cases, if some things you post, whatever, it's notoriety, and this is in a capitalist society, right? It's freedom of speech, right? And stuff like that. So it's crazy just to think that they try to say, oh yeah, this socialist country doesn't allow you to have freedom of speech. We don't have that here. You can't even especially as a colonized person in the imperial core, all this police brutality that goes on, all the history of racism and apartheid here and stuff like that, even, this stuff that continues to go on, history of redlining and so forth and so on. So it's crazy, but, obviously they don't talk about that in a vacuum, stuff that we've seen with Trevor Noah. I don't know if you've seen that, him once again pushing China propaganda and stuff like that. So, hits us in all different angles. So I guess with that, maybe we could talk about how the petty bourgeois, the African petty bourgeois, is sometimes involved, and where we see that them pushing the interests of the reactionary forces.
So at least in a good number of cases, the petty bourgeois are usually the ones working most directly for companies in the global north, or is like maintaining their like wealth or income by collaborating with the global north. So in cases where that relationship of like send resources and labor is like, in the case that relationship is disturbed, the first people who might lose money from that would be the petty bourgeois in Africa. And so like they just try to maintain their position. And sometimes that means maintaining the like unfair relationship because it benefits them.
Yeah, they're the liaison between the working class people and the bourgeois, the ruling class, a lot of the time. So, for them to extract more money or get the bigger crumbs that they do from the ruling class, they have to align themselves with that interest. So oftentimes we see even if you talk about ventures that they go on, because they don't own the means of production, they have to tie themselves to the ruling class who do own the means of production, whether it's factories, whether it's different fields and land, they do. So they have to tie themselves in with that. So a lot of times we see whenever, even if they go on ventures like capitalistic ventures, they get funding by them. They are in partnership with them because they know on their own they're not able to extract as much profits or even reach as wide of the market as they would if they didn't tie themselves to them. So with that, we see them once again like Trevor Noah. We see the likes of like in some cases like the Diddy's or the whatever of the world, right? And I don't want to just like I'm talking about a complete class of people, so I don't want to make it seem like these are the only two or three.
That is only just individual.
Yeah, it's not just individual. Yeah, it's not just like one or two individuals. It's just a class of people, and these are the people that we know, that are more famous on the West. Like, you could go to Africa and you can see local petty bourgeois, see people there who push the same thing, right? Push the whole notion that Black capitalism is like the thing we should be going for instead of socialism, or getting the people to like, individualize the struggle, or even in the sense of like, pushing people away from like organizing essentially and just having people look at solely through an imperialist capitalist lens, which they will probably never achieve, to be honest. So I think they play a big part in a lot of the stuff we see now, on many levels.
It's like definitely not just individuals, but like people with common interests. So like if you serve as like a middle person or like a middleman for the unfair extraction of resources, and like you maintain your money from like being part of that relationship, then you're just gonna try to like, well, then like most people are gonna try to maintain that relationship, and so sometimes that can be against the needs of the people themselves.
Yeah, yeah. In most cases, they're not, and not to say that there hasn't been, cases where petty bourgeois has aided in the struggle, but I guess more so in recent times, and the other side of it, looking at it dialectically, yes, they in some cases, and they can play an instrumental role in the struggle by funding and joining organizations and stuff like that, and funding movements. Progressive movements, essentially a revolutionary movement, I should say. But at the same time, what we see dominated a lot of times, and even the ones that have helped, sometimes in some cases, have see some type of pressure from the state, right? The intelligence agencies domestically usually, once they realize that, they essentially attack those people through various means, like some of the methods that we named earlier. So, that's also something that we should put into account. But at the same time, what we see, what is publicized to us from media, is usually that they're the ones, just pretty much the mouthpiece for the imperialists a lot of times. Like they try to make it seem like it's distinct, but it's really not. When you get to the core of what's being talked about, what the analysis is at the end of the day, what the talking points are. So yeah. So if you get bare bones with it, it's pretty much it's all in one. They just the talking piece for the imperialists.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I guess maybe we could talk about how these reactionary forces manifested themselves on the continent in itself. Like how does it continue to, and what do we see continuously happening and historically happened on the continent with reactionary forces?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you want to just kind of like give some examples. I know one, we could talk about the CIA ousting Nkrumah in Ghana in 1966. The West had a big play in that. After his book, Neo-Colonialism, The Last Stage of Imperialism, I believe. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's the name of the book. I always get it mixed up with Lenin's book, Last Stage of Capitalism. I think maybe Last Stage of Capitalism. I can't remember. But anyway, after that book, and he pretty much exposed a lot of the multinational corporations that are involved in Africa. So it got a lot of them angry. On top of the fact, so in Dirty Work, CIA in Africa talks about how also they wanted to utilize this opportunity to gain access to certain, because Nkrumah and Ghana had relations with the Soviet Union as well, amongst other socialist countries, wanted to gain access into like Soviet Union intelligence as well, and or just like what's the word I'm looking for? I think it's I think it's Soviet Union intelligence and stuff like that. So we want to get insight into them essentially as well. But the main reason, the emphasis why they did it was more so due to the fact of his book, Neo-Colonialism, and also a lot of the policies and stuff like that he had in place that was moving towards a socialist government in Ghana. So that's definitely one.
Yeah.
And then we also have in Guinea with Sadiq during his reign, he faced from not only the French, the Portuguese, and other Western nations, and multiple attacks, multiple times. It wasn't just like one or two. But the PDG is strong, man. The PDG had fought that off for years and years and years. The PDG, their reign in Guinea was from 58 to 84, which is a decent amount of time because, being Nkrumah was like under 10 years, 57 to 66. So, with the Convention People's Party. But yeah, the PDG stood strong and fought against the French on multiple levels. There were so many different plots that were done there to tear down or to kill and destroy the PDG. But I think it shows how organized efforts, could help fight that off. And then we also have, the CIA with, the ousting of Lumumba and implementation of Ubuntu, and that is, I think, is central focus too sometimes, or I think it should be, because the Congo plays an instrumental role in Africa, essentially, because Congo is probably the most mineral resource country on the continent, where so many different multinational corporations, actually recently, I think Apple, Microsoft, and a few other corporations supposedly went to court for like child labor laws and things of that nature, and exploitation of the people out in the Congo, because of conditions that they live in and they are under to mine the coltan and all these things that we use for these electronics, is ridiculous. It's crazy when you think about it. So that even to this day it still goes on. Under the current regime. So they had to make sure Lumumba could once again an African, and I don't want to once again individualize it. Like, when I talk about Nkrumah, I got to mention the CPP. When I talk about Sadiq Ture, I got to talk about the PDG. When I talk about Lumumba, I got to talk about, the organizing efforts he made there. So it's not just him. And if these people were alive today, they would tell you that too. It wasn't just them, it was organization, the people who made these organizations. So I don't make it seem like, oh yeah, people were just like, God or anything like that, or Allah, or anything. It's just, these are monumental figures, yes, but at the same time, the people made it be that way. The people comprised of these organizations. So yeah, and then even now, one of the more recent ones we see in Guinea again, where I believe the military force who essentially did the coup d'etat was trained by the West, I think specifically the US, essentially. So, we see this again and again and again, right? Where, it's constant overthrows, constant murders, and implement coup d'etats, and them implementing who they want, neo-colonial puppets at the end of the day, because once again, they're the mouthpiece for the imperialists, and they serve their interests because it brings them money too. They get bigger crumbs when they do that. Yeah. Same way for the petty bourgeois. So yeah.
And then when if we were to talk about specific resources, at least in Ghana, there was energy towards bauxite. Nowadays it's more so towards oil. And then with the Congo, particularly, it was a rich site for uranium. And so that uranium was required for nuclear power and nuclear warfare. So the US specifically was trying to gain control of that resource, because that could change. That was part of the basis of their whole military strength and prowess. Whether it was cobalt for technology or uranium for nuclear weapons or nuclear power. And nowadays, you can also point out Niger with France. So there's an unequal relationship of exploitation and coups there as well, because Niger also has uranium now, and so that's used. And so most of Niger's uranium is sent to France to be used for nuclear power.
Yeah, when I heard about that or read about that in Walter Rodney's book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, it was crazy just to think even the nuclear power the West has is due to Africa. But obviously they like to frame the picture of Africa, which serves their interests, to show was some destitute place, some place that you shouldn't want to go, some place where everyone is savage, right? But really it's the West is maintained off the exploitation of Africa and the global South in general. That's where their resources come from, essentially. So it's crazy to think, uranium, which is, funding their defense system and their nuclear power. It's kind of crazy when you kind of look back at it. But yeah, I think also, there's also relevance to some of the stuff we said in relation to what happens domestically, just, throughout the diaspora, the stuff that I've noted with the Panthers, Black Panther Party, also the Black Liberation Army, which is the underground arm of the Black Panther Party. We've seen the same things, the same tactics used that was on the Panthers done to them in the Black Liberation Army. And even those who may not know, Garvey and the UNIA, J. Edgar Hoover, that was probably one of his first tasks was to repel the UNIA, suppress them essentially, and Garvey and his movement. So, then you see that there's actually assassination attempts. If I don't know if those who read Garvey and Garveyism by Amy Garvey, essentially, and it's talking about the assassination attempt on his life, and them getting and putting that mail fraud. I believe it was mail fraud they tried to put on him as well. So
I think they were successful at it too.
I'm sorry.
I'm pretty. Weren't they successful at the mail fraud charges?
Yeah, they were. Yeah, so they got him. Deported. I guess he had to leave essentially, but go back to Jamaica, essentially deported. So,
and they also prevented him from going into other countries.
Yeah, so he never stepped a foot in Africa. Well, that was more so because of it was colonialism was prevalent, which it still is, but it's just neo-colonialism now. But the Western nations, had political power, direct political power on the continent. So when they seen that Garvey movement was so strong, had millions of members, and it was actually making its way towards Africa, they banned him from coming to, because he was supposed to go to Liberia. There's other aspects that went into the Liberia thing too, but generally the surrounding states around Liberia was forcing like the hand and saying, no, you can't come here. Actually, if you were found with one of the newspapers, I believe it was a Negro World, was the newspaper at the time. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was the Negro World. If you were caught with it in certain African nations, you were actually sentenced. You could do prison time for that, just for having a paper. So it's this is decades ago. So it's crazy to think, how that stuff, hasn't really, manifests itself in different ways and how it works. So, you think of even Cuba, the Bay of Pigs, the various assassination attempts on Castro. As Cuba has a high African population, a high African influence in their culture as well. Think of Haiti's relationship with France and the different, plots to and coups and stuff like that that's been going on. Even a more recent one, it's shown to have some Western ties to it, essentially U.S. ties in the Pacific. You think about Papa Doc and Duvaliers and stuff like that. It has a long history of that, once again, the West being a part of that. So, yeah.
I think even for Haiti specifically, that kind of exploitation has been going for this point for like several centuries. So like from like the times of slavery in Haiti, like even when it gained independence, France had basically forced it to pay reparations back to the slave owners. And so for like centuries, like Haiti had to pay back money back to the people that colonized them.
Exactly, which is crazy. we fought for our independence and freedom. Now we have to pay you for that, and it and the people are still paying even more so because of the overthrows of the governments. I believe the Clinton administration even put in where the rice is, like, for the most part, even though Haiti can grow their own rice, they import the rice from the West, from the U.S. Essentially, and that happened during
to open their. I think it was the deal with Aristide. So from what I understand, they kidnapped Aristide, and then when he was trying to go back to Haiti, they said like, we'll let you go back and then be president again if you like sign these specific policies. And one of the policies was opening the farming market to the rest of the world, well, particularly the U.S. And then secondly, not having subsidies for the farming economy. So there would be, even though there are Haitian farmers who grew rice and different crops, it meant that the market of like only Haitian rice and crops had to be open to now international markets, particularly the US. And so farmers who grew rice in the US could send their products down to Haiti. Like typically that would mean that the the international rice would cost more, but then the US had put, and like still today put subsidies on a lot of its products. Uh, so like it was subsidized US rice, which made it cheaper than the Haitian local rice. And so like people would go for the cheaper product. And so that destroyed the local Haitian rice economy.
Yeah. See, like people got to tie these things, man. They got to tie them in. You know, you did a great job explaining that, man. Because people think things just happen in a vacuum, or things just come out of nowhere. There's historical relevance to everything, material, you know, understanding to all of these things, right?
Yeah.
Nothing falls out of the blue sky. At least not the current conditions we see now. So yeah, man. I guess.
And then even and then even a couple years ago in Haiti, there were protests to increase the minimum wage, especially for factory workers. And the U.S. basically convinced Haiti to prevent a minimum wage from happening. And so like still being actively involved in controlling like the price of labor and the price of resources, and then trying to open the market as much as possible for international products.
Yeah, and one answer to that is, as we stated earlier, as you stated in the intro, is Pan-Africanism. That's the only answer to all of this, is us organizing, unifying under scientific socialism, and that's unifying the continent of Africa. When I say that, it's just us, specific. When I say that, it's unifying the continent so the continent can intervene. I think I said it on the last episode, prior to that. Can intervene because once Africa is powerful, Africans throughout the diaspora is powerful. If we have leadership that aren't serving the interests of the neo-colonialists, the colonialists, imperialists, at the end of the day, they're serving the interests of the people. That will be only to the benefit of African people worldwide. So, and if we're unified and socialist, yes, then we be powerful. So some could argue the most powerful nation in the world, or continent in the world, I should say. So that's really the only way we get there is through organizing. There's no country who's currently socialist or liberated themselves from Western imperialism and capitalism that didn't organize or do years of organizing to get to the point where they are. So there's really no other alternative. There's no example you could give me that that's happened really in the last at least 100 years, to my understanding. So yeah, we gotta organize, man, to get this out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and now also, yeah, I forgot even Move too. The Move movement in Philly. They bombed, I believe John Africa and his family and stuff like that. And they were doing a lot of heavy community work out in Philadelphia. So, we've seen that as well. But yeah. So I guess probably close this on out. Do you have any lasting words or comments to make in relation to the topic or anything else?
Yeah, I guess one theme is that if there's violence happening somewhere, or there's usually a reason. At least for the global South, if there's a situation where it seems like people are doing something illogical in the sense of having low prices for labor, or having low prices for resources, is because there was a concerted effort to make it that way. Yeah. So try to look into, if you have the chance to, just try to look into these countries and these organizations, like Black Panthers, Black Liberation Army, MOVE, the UNIA, Haiti, Cuba, and then really many African organizations try to see the history of like what reasons did they start, and then what were the forces that tried to stop them, and what was the motivations behind them.
Exactly. Yeah, man. And once you read that history, I'm pretty sure it will speak for itself and probably call you to join the organization. Those who watch, I'm talking. So that's the only way. Once again, we could deal with these oppressive forces is by organizing. There's really no other way. There's no other alternative to do so. I mean, people you could describe alternatives, like engaging in electoral politics in the U.S. And we can see where we try and do that for how long? Where does that getting us? So there's really no alternative but us to organize. So so we appreciate you guys joining us. Before we end this podcast, we'd like to plug in our other comrades who are doing similar work to us inside of the A-APRP. So we have the Forward Ever podcast, which is on Spotify and other streaming services we listen to. We also have our New Mexico chapter, I believe, every Thursday. I think it's 12 Eastern, or I think it's 12 Mountain Time. I'm sorry when you sign one of the New Mexico chapter, if I don't get the time right. I believe it's every Thursday they have theirs. And then we have the Revolutionary African Women. We also have our ancestors' voices who do their podcast as well. So we have the links in the description. So we implore you to watch their podcast as well. Once again, appreciate you guys joining and hope we catch you next week for another episode for whatever.
For whatever.